I'm sorry, guys. I realize what I did in hindsight, and I've confused a lot of you. Okay, genuinely, deep down from inside me, I apologize, because when the iPad Air 4 came out, it was a bit more expensive than I thought it was going to be, and given it didn't have Face ID and you were going with Touch ID and all that stuff, I was kind of like, well, $600 and you only get 64 gigs, and if you want to get more than that, you have to spend an extra $150 to get 256, which, in my opinion, puts you well in the price range of the 2020 11-inch iPad Pro, which is a way better product overall. Or you could just go with a certified refurbished 2018 iPad Pro and probably save yourself some money and get a better product. But once I did that, a lot of people are now thinking, well, maybe I should just opt for the iPad Pro, but aren't there new iPad Pros coming soon? And yeah, I mean, we should at least talk about when the next iPad Pro is rumored to come out, because Quo has talked about it recently. So let's talk about Apple's first mini LED product. Let's begin. Yeah, the apologies don't stop today either, because I used to think that the Pro Display XDR was mini LED, and it kind of is, but not technically. It's more so just a super really advanced LCD display, and a lot of what mini LED screens are kind of based on the tech that they put into the Pro Display XDR. And I guess this one is a little bit different. The supply chain and the technology, because obviously they're not using the exact same tech that goes into the Pro Display, which is like, giant and thick, and somehow miniaturizing that into an iPad Pro. But Quo was saying that the supply chains that are working on bringing mini LED displays to Apple are seeing better than expected results, and that they want mass production for the first mini LED product to begin in Q4 of this year. But it's important to remember that quote. Quo's quote. Here, if you wanted to start a website, that would be a great way to title it. Quo is saying that mass production of these displays will be in Q4 of 2020. That doesn't necessarily mean that the first iPad Pro is coming in the fourth quarter. It could. I mean, they could pull a miracle and decide to rapidly unveil the new iPad Pro and ship it right after mass production had began, but this is new tech. This is a display technology that hasn't been implemented in this way into Apple products before. And in case you didn't know what mini LED is, it's kind of like taking a lot of the benefits of an OLED display and bringing it to a more LCD design. So the iPad Pro probably couldn't just straight up get an OLED display because Samsung wants those for themselves, or because Apple's very picky about contrast ratio and color accuracy, and getting 120 Hz has taken a long time for OLED displays. Samsung is just now getting it there, and Apple, I think, wants to diversify the supply chains a little bit because Samsung supplies so much of the world's OLED displays that Apple's working on this mini LED tech, which should mean that there's no burn-in issues, but you still get your 120 Hz, you still get your great contrast ratio, your great color accuracy, and essentially it means like as if the iPad were to have an OLED display, though technically it's not actually OLED, it'll just feel like it is. So that means better colors, better brightness, and better overall looking display for the next gen iPad Pro. But important to remember, other than mini LED and 5G and the A14X chip, which hasn't been unveiled yet, but we did get our sneak peek at the A14 chip with the iPad Air 4, you can imagine the performance gains on that 5nm design are probably going to be pretty amazing. Other than that, though, there's not been too much rumored for this next generation iPad Pro. I mean, those updates in themselves might seem like a big one. Personally, I just don't give a crap about 5G, so I could care less about that. And A12Z chip has been plenty fast for me. I haven't been in any circumstances where I was like, dang it, my iPad Pro is just too dang slow. So going even faster than the A12Z is, inevitable. It's like, okay, cool. Yeah, I expected that. But I'm not expecting the bezels really to shrink on the next generation iPad Pro. I mean, that would be cool, but I think most people agree, like, you need a little bit of bezel there for your thumbs to rest on and to prevent the display from registering your fingers when you don't mean them to. So my hope, because we've all spent $300 or $400 on keyboard cases, is that this next generation iPad Pro will still fit in the same form factor as our current iPad Pros. That way we don't have to buy all new accessories all over again. Now you gotta buy Apple Pencil 3 now, and you gotta get Magic Keyboard 2nd generation because we just moved the smart connector over slightly. I would hate that, and it sounds like something Apple could do. So please don't do that. I want to keep using my keyboard case, Apple. If new iPads come out, don't make me drop another $400 on keyboards. But essentially, the reason I'm telling you all this is because we don't have an exact timeline on when the iPad Pro is shipping. In my opinion, it doesn't really sound like Apple to release 2 iPad Pros within a single year. So Quo did kind of the same thing in 2019. He said that the triple camera, the iPad Pro with LiDAR, that would come out in October. Obviously, it didn't come out until March. So if we're hearing that mass production of these mini LED displays won't start until Q4 of this year, I would would say best case scenario, you shouldn't expect an iPad Pro refresh until March or June of 2021. So if you're in desperate need of a new iPad and you're not willing to wait that long, honestly, I don't think you're actually going to miss out by just going with today's current iPad Pro, the one that came out back in March, because Mini LED sounds exciting, and on paper it sounds like it's a big deal to be getting better colors and better contrast ratio, but I'll be honest, it's never been a complaint of mine when using the iPad Pro. I've never been like, the colors are just so bad. In fact, if I had to choose between using my iPad Pro for something and my iPhone that involves just watching a movie or looking at the screen for prolonged periods of time, I would still go with the iPad Pro just because I'm such a sucker for 120 hertz, and I can watch shows and I browse the web on the iPad Pro, and the colors and the contrast ratio looks great. I mean, sure, if the black pixels were just a little bit more black and it rivaled the kind of OLED quality of my iPhone, it would be nice, but I'm not sure if it's kind of wait 6 to 9 months kind of nice, you know? Like, there's also a decent chance with these Mini LED displays being adopted that the pricing might not be as great as it is now. I'm only assuming that because the Pro Display XDR was super expensive, and typically whenever Apple adds OLED to something, it gets more expensive, maybe with the exception of the iPhone 12. But for the most part, I think that if you're willing to wait, if your current iPad or your current Mac or whatever you're using can hold you out a little bit longer, we're kind of in between refreshes right now. You know, we're not right next to one, but at the same time, we're also kind of far away from the last iPad Pro refresh. And typically, Apple doesn't refresh the iPad Pros annually. It's around 18 months, not 12. So even if one came out in March, it would be much, much sooner and earlier than most would expect. And knowing how things at Apple typically get pushed back further than what most leakers think the schedules are, I wouldn't be shocked if we don't see another iPad Pro until quadruple UDC for next year. So just keep that in mind. It is a possibility, and none of the leakers are very convinced on when exactly it's coming, whether it's end of this year or March or June. They're not being super clear or concrete, and their leaks like to change a lot. So point being, if Mini LED sounds like something you really, really want to see and you really want on your next iPad, go ahead and wait and see if these rumors or leakers change their direction of any kind. But if that doesn't sound like a big deal to you, like you've used an iPad Pro and you didn't think that the colors were bad or the contrast ratio was bad enough to be distracting, then I'd say still, yeah, buy a 2020 iPad Pro. It's not that bad. You can find discounts on them elsewhere because they've been available for a while now, and I still think A12Z chip is plenty fast, and the value you get out of an $800 iPad Pro today, you know, 6 gigs of RAM, 128 gigs of storage, Face ID, ProMotion, quad speakers, it's a solid product, and I don't think you're going to regret buying it now if it turns out next March or June there's a new iPad that's more expensive but has slightly better colors. Hopefully that answers some of your questions, but if there's something I'm missing, please feel free to let me know. This is your Apple Sheep here, and I'll see you all in the next one.